All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this evening's Scribal session and tonight's discussion on the charter designing process for Ansteorra. For those of you who may be interested in designing something, as we're looking for a bunch of new designs in different styles and whatnot. Tonight's information is mostly how the process is going to work and what the basic expectations are and what specific requirements there are for paper, for ink, lines, design, basic stuff. We're just going to kind of jump into this, and we're going to start with some updates to how this process works, because in the past, for those of you who maybe have not been part of this before, historically, new charter designs have been solicited in multiple ways. Sometimes it was just open acceptance, just people saying, hey, we need some stuff, send it in. Or sometimes there would be competitions where people would send in designs and there would be winners. And many wonderful designs obviously have come from these methods. We have lots of really lovely scrolls. However, sometimes that means that a design might arrive that still needed minor or major revisions that could have been more easily corrected if they had been caught during the design process. Or something comes in that, because of an error, would require it to be completely redone to be usable. And so we're hoping to avoid those things by having a slightly more guided process this time. And this will look a little different for everybody, but by having communication throughout the process to be positive, to be supportive, and to allow artisans with a variety of different levels of knowledge and experience to have the opportunity to give this a go, to design an original work and provide something new for the kingdom that people will be excited to paint and put up on their walls. And everyone will be able to have, a good time with this. This will look a little different, like I said, depending on the individual scribe, just because of it will sort of depend on the level of experience that individual scribes have. For people who've done this for years and have maybe designed a charter before, a lot of that is going to be more of an informal conversation. People coming and saying, hey, here's my idea, and possibly me going, oh, that looks awesome. Have you thought about this? Or, oh, I just love that, or whatever. And just if there's something that needs to be caught, pointing it out, making sure that if there are specific insignia, they're drawn correctly, whatever that kind of information might be. For those of you who are less experienced, maybe this is your first time doing an original or an original for the kingdom, or at least designing something that is a charter to be used repeatedly by multiple people instead of something you're doing just for yourself, because obviously that has a totally different thought process to some extent when it's going to be recreated and used multiple times. That may be a more guided, more class, like, okay, how do I make this work? And you can come to me or to any experienced scribe in your area and say, how do I make these lines straight? How do I make this work? And then just checking in with me going, so here's my idea, here are my sketches, then, here's the inked version, here's, till you get through to a final product. We will be I will do my best to match up people who come in and say, I'm only a calligrapher, or I'm only an illuminator, and they want somebody to work with. And I will do my best to match those people with somebody so that you all have the opportunity to do the part that you're interested in and to give this a go. But I really want to have less of a people put in a lot of effort, and in the competitions, then you had designs that did not get used. And that's always kind of a shame. Or have somebody work really hard on something, but there's an error or something in it that's intrinsically not going to work, and not know it till the end, because that's really frustrating. And I don't want that to happen to anybody. I want this to be a positive thing and us to get a whole bunch of new designs that everybody can enjoy. So we're going to try this with a little more guidance and just see how it goes. Materials. So for designing a charter, you are not designing something that's going to be handed out in its final form the way you're designing it. And this is where, like, the thought process is a little bit different than designing an original or design, of some sort, because you are not designing in period, you're not doing this on parchment. You're not doing this on pergamena. This should be on stuff that's going to your goal is to create something that will photocopy clean and white with just white and black lines when it is reproduced. And so for this, a lot of this is going to be using your modern supplies other than whatever pen you're using. Charters are designed to be photocopied. Paper needs to be white. It must be white. Do not design a multimedia, it can be multimedia paper, Bristol board, smooth white surface. Work on a smooth white surface. Do not use a colored paper that will not photocopy properly. Do not use a modeled paper. That will also not copy clear and it won't be usable. I had a design come in once that was very nice. It came in on like modeled sort of greenish gray paper. I could not get that to color. That would not copy clear. There was no way. And it was a real shame because they just put it on the wrong paper. So white paper. For pens, for lining pens, when you're doing your line work, micron or a similar style of pen. So, a technical pen is best for a good solid, you want your lines to be the same width all the way through. You want them to be smooth and crisp and clear. So those kind of pens, they need to be black because we're photocopying. Make sure all your lines are black. Black quality pen. Sizes should not be smaller than the 03. 05 is preferable. We did several tests and discussion. There was a whole bunch of discussion on this within the college officers and a few folks a few times, discussing the necessity of lines not being too small. When lines are too fine, they don't copy well. They also make it much harder for less experienced scribes to stay in the lines and not go over those lines and then having to try and redraw them in. So an 05 size in your micron, your black pen is preferable. You can go thicker. If it is a design where historically it has very thick, distinct lines, you can go thicker than an 05, but please don't go smaller than the 03. Lines need to be clear. For calligraphy ink, for the same purpose of it needs to copy really dark, you are using dark black inks that are going to copy consistently. They should not be mottled or show up gray. So this is not the place to pull out our iron gall ink. I love my oak gall ink, but my oak gall ink is practically transparent and only darkens with time, exposed to, oxygen. Use an India ink, use a modern black ink of some form. At that point, it doesn't have to be color fast or archival, if only because of the fact that it is clearly, going to be copied, but you want it to last. And really, if you can use like a nice archival ink, that master, that original copy is going to stay nice for whenever we have to make masters in the future. So please keep that in mind for your calligraphy ink. All right, rulers and stencils. So when people are trying to paint something, it really helps if the lines are consistent and straight lines are straight and curves are smooth. Use tools. Tools are period and modern. And anything you need to make sure that those lines meet where they're supposed to and go the way they're supposed to so that everything lines up properly, use it. Go ahead and use your tools. You're not free. You don't have to freehand all of this stuff. Those are really helpful for making sure that that is consistent and that all of that works. So that's your materials. Are there any questions about materials before I go on? Or something maybe specifically that I haven't mentioned here that you have a question about for the design materials? Okay. I had a question I just thought of myself, which is calligraphy pens. You can use whatever works best for you, but please use a modern pen with a nib size, because we're going to want to know what nib size you used so we can tell our calligraphers and Sable Scroll when they're trying to fill it out what size nib was used in a scroll so they can match it so that the calligraphy is the same size. So at that point, whether it's a cartridge pen, whether it's a dip pen, but whatever is going to be concise and clear and legible. So please don't use a quill. Again, modern materials for this design process.
I have a point on that.
Please do.
If you're using a specific nib size, but then you're doing copies, the nib size may not match exactly because of the shrinkage generation issue with copies.
Fair enough. Thank you. That said, no copy out there should ever be more than 2 generations from the original, because from the very original, we will make the master and all copies will come off that master. So it will be a minimal difference if done properly. But yes, no, that's a very good point. It won't be exact, but it will be better than them trying to guess And that actually comes to another point I'll be making here about this, which is design requirements. All right, so the sizes of scrolls, and we're going to talk about a lot of this. In our kingdom, the way our designs are done, there are expected sizes for different levels of scroll. So there are kingdom scroll text size requirements. They are available in a file, Ansteorra and scroll text size standards. It's on the website. It is available. It's in the How to Design a Charter section of the College of Scribes website. If you go there and go to charters and how to design a charter, all of this information is in fact there. But we're going over it today, so you have it. And I can answer questions if anyone has any. So standard size rule. There is a chart on the website, a live chart on the specifics for every single different one if you want to look at the breakdown. But the general rule is if it's a non-armigerous award, the size of the whole final piece is, and that includes like the border around on the paper, is 8.5 by 11. For an AOA level armigerous award, 9 by 12, and for grant level, 11 by 14. We're not talking about peerage and baronial and thief scrolls today because those don't have any charters. Those are always originals. And this specific information session, of course, is about designing for charters. Remember that this is the size of, again, the paper, the full scroll. Your design is going to have a 1-inch margin around it that you're going to go in and draw first, because it's going to have to be matted and framed. And the sizes are standardized to fit in standard purchasable frames and matting so that people are not spending really crazy amounts of money to custom frame mats and scrolls. Because if you've ever gone to an art store and asked for custom sizes and costs, they are much higher than just being able to buy the pre-made ones. And while some scrolls are worth that, it gets very expensive very quickly, and we try not to be the expensive group, right? So keep that in mind. You have to have enough of a border around your art that it doesn't extend all the way to the edge. Doesn't matter if it's going on a much bigger piece of charter paper later, leave that space. Design within the space. And design to size. I will not be blowing up or shrinking artwork and calligraphy. I will not. It does not work well. We've tried it before. It's been done for years. It causes issue with your line sizes and quality, and it causes a lot of issues with that matching the calligraphy, because sometimes then your calligraphy ends up not even a size that matches anything. And so we're just not going to do that, because this will be a guided process. At some point, if it's not quite the right size, we're going to have that conversation real quick, like, before you ink that, that's too big or too small. But if you do it properly, design-wise, it shouldn't be a problem. Knowing this up front avoids a lot of the problems. Just not assuming that you know. So these are the size requirements specifically. We have a few others. Text. So scroll texts. Again, Ansteorra has pre-written, with some variety in the phrasing, scroll text. We have a wonderful scroll text system based, thanks to Mr. Serena, in legal texts of England, and it's very cool. We have a file of those approved scroll texts in the Kingdom of Ansteorra, which is very useful. It's also available in the Designing a Charter section of the website. The selections within them, if you go in and read from the top, there's a whole section at the top that explains how this works and also offers a variety of phrase options, which were widened several years ago. In fact, about 10 or 11 years ago now. So there are new variations on some of the phrases that can be used in the texts so that there's a little more variety and less predictability in court. I don't know how many of you have sat in court and been able to kind of like quote along the entire scroll or known within the first like 3 words what the award is. So in order to try and avoid that, one of the crowns about a decade ago said, hey, can we please widen that? And it was widened, but we haven't had a lot of new designs since then to use them. So I would like, in this case, to press that we try and use the less common phrasing and a little more variety in the phrasing. If you're unsure which ones to use, you can ask any Scribal officer who's been around for a while. And they can say, okay, this is the one. Or if you've looked at charters, you know that the pre-let start has been on like 1 million scrolls. So this will give us a wider variety of capitals to use, which is more fun for illuminating. And it will make it a little less obvious in court what's being given from word 1. So for example, pray let all know is in a lot of older designs. So is let all know and all shall know. There's a lot of L's, P's, and A's. There's not as much now know that or each and all shall know that. There's a list of like 15 or so starting options. And then there's other little places where you can vary the phrasing a little bit and it gives you the suggested permissible wording. Please don't vary from those options. That is something that we'll check before you put down calligraphy. We can make sure that you have the right text picked out. The general information section on there is very, very useful. And again, before you do all that work on getting the calligraphy spaced and put out properly and down on paper, please come check with me. And this, like I said, these will be like very brief discussions. You can send me an image and say, this is what I want to use. Is this right? Is it going to fit? Have I done something? What are we doing here? Very quick, very easy, just to make sure that it's right. And then you get to go on with it. So make sure you're using the correct texts for our charters. All right, so layout, discussion of layout. Again, line work should be at least at the smallest 03, 05 is good, larger if needed for the size of pen. So no incredibly fine lines. The scroll needs to be paintable by artists with a wide variety of experience and skills. Remember that a lot of people who really like to paint scrolls, that's what they do. They like to paint scrolls. Maybe they don't do another art form, or maybe they don't design, and this is what they want to do. Lines need to be clean. They need to meet properly. There should not be like random gaps where the lines don't close, unless that's part of the design, which is very rare, but that'll be part of our discussion. And they shouldn't extend past where you want them to stop. There shouldn't be like random little dog tails and whatever sticking out. Just make sure the lines meet properly. Avoid large areas of black ink. It is okay to have areas in your design that have sections that are black. We live in Ansteorra. There's a lot of black. However, what we've discovered is if you try and pre-black the design, it does not copy well. Putting that much ink down through a copier causes a lot of problems with getting copies to come out clean and not streaked because it does not dry quickly in the copier. So if an area needs to be filled in black, that's just going to be something you're going to include in the directions on how to paint the design. You'll be able to say the background of this is traditionally black. That's something we can put. If you've ever looked at, the charter, the information at the bottom on how to paint this, that's exactly where that kind of thing will go. Leave room. This is a big one. Spacing of calligraphy. This is a big one. Your lines need to be even. First off, they should be the same distance apart. Your letters need to be the same size, as close as you can get it all the way across. Straight lines. Please rule your lines. And then leave room. There are things that are going to get filled in later. This is the thing with all charters and all scrolls is there's always information that goes in like the day of, right? For the most part. So leave proper spaces for real names. The recipient's name, assume that they have a really long name. Maybe it's, maybe it's a Italian queen with a 6-word name, or it's, Mahadi with his full name, whatever would go on there. We have lots of excellent, long, beautiful names in our kingdom, and a lot of our crowns don't have really short names. So make sure that there's room for the recipient's name and also the crown's names wherever they're going to go on the scroll. If it's going to be, so and so and so and so, crowns of Ansteorra want to do this. Keep that in mind. A full line is preferable for the name of like, if it's whoever's getting the award, just because you don't know. You're going to be leaving spaces also for the name of the group. Again, I recommend leaving several inches for the name of the group, because while we have some nice little groups like Elfsea, we also have, Bjornsburg and Wiesenfeuer and Moonshadow with its extra E's and lots of different, long, beautiful names. And if you're going to write Barony of yada, 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 it's going to be a thing. So leave enough space for the long things. And of course, at the bottom, make sure there's enough room for the crown to actually sign, make sure that the spacing is correct. This is another reason we're going to do this one guided, especially if you haven't done it before, because a lot of the issues we've had with things coming in, sometimes, not solicited, but people were really wanting to do something, is spacing issues with the calligraphy. And I mean, like, the words are like piled up over on one side and there's big spaces, or the space for the crown's name on the scroll being like this big. And we actually had an approved design from like the 90s, from before I started playing, that had both the rulers' names had to fit in like a 2-inch space. And we could not even fit John Paul and Jillian in that space. So I'm not sure why that scroll lasted as long as it did, because it was retired many years ago, because calligraphers would just not, the Kingdom Scribe would just never fill that one out because it was a pain.
Can I add?
Please do.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we took the crown name with "and" between them out,
Yes.
because he may have a longer name than hers, and that way we can adjust it the way we want to.
Yes.
And then also on the dates, the longest month is November. I don't know how many times I have tried to squeeze November into a space that was long enough for April, but not November. So, you know, when you're putting in your month, try to make it as long as you need to for the November. We can fill in little dingles, whatever, in the spaces. If the date is May, we can put something else in there to fill that space.
Thank you. So very critical stuff there. So leave several inches. We'll discuss it as you're working on your design. It'll be great. And yeah, don't put an "and" up there wherever the crown's name is. Just leave that out. Use clean and uncomplicated hands. There is a lot of really gorgeous calligraphy out there, but somebody else is going to have to match your calligraphy later. It can be a fun hand, but don't use like the most complicated version of that hand. And you'll make people very happy. You're also going to be turning in an alphabet of letters in that hand that you're going to write out. Whoever your calligrapher is, whether it's you or somebody you're working with, will write a ductus. We'll have an alphabet to go with every one of these new designs, so that calligraphers working on them can look it up and know, okay, well, what would a Q look like in this hand? Because there's not a Q on this scroll, or there will always be a Q on that scroll because it says Queen, but you know, a letter that's not there for whatever reason in the design, to figure out what it's supposed to look like. And please erase all pencil lines completely when the design is complete, because if they're not completely erased, they also do not disappear in photocopy anymore. The better copiers have gotten, the cleaner these need to be, because they no longer, like, this is why we don't use, there used to be a trick where there were blue grid paper that, you know, the blue lines would not copy on copiers, and so you could use the nice grid paper and the lines would go away. This no longer works. The new copiers, the way that they work, the new digital modern copier will pick up those lines. This is why we're designing on plain white paper. Also, cutting and pasting. People used to literally like cut and paste and tape things together to make copies, and all of that shows up now. The lines, the pieces of tape, even if they're clear, like little things will show up because copiers have gotten so much better. So this is why we're doing it this way. But yeah, so we are into here. All right, things to submit with your design. Once we get to and we have a design, what all needs to actually be sent in and submitted. So along with the art, you will have the name of the inspirational text and where to find it. So, you know, manuscript, this, folio, whatever, page, you know, V3, whatever it is. Because the nice thing is most of these are now available digital on the internet. Or if you have a book, you can say which book it's from as well. Be like, this is the one, and this is the book I got it out of. If we can find them online, I plan to link the original documents to the Scribal galleries. So when people go to look at how these are supposed to be painted, we have the examples of the actual manuscripts available. So this will make this much easier. And say, you know, and then say which culture and time period it's from. You know, this is a Venetian scroll from the 1460s, whatever it is. The names of the artisan, if the original artisan who did that design is known, that's a great piece of information to have for people, but also the names of those of you who actually worked on it, whoever designed it, whoever did the calligraphy, if it's a compilation, which a lot of them are, the names of the artisans as you want them published. spelled the way you want them, because if I have to go and look them up in the OP, it may be your official name. So give me what you want on there. Even if what you passed is not what you go by, which happens a lot. So basic directions for painting, what colors were used in period on the original, any unique technique elements that people should know about to help paint it. Like I said, we talked earlier about stuff that's supposed to be filled in black, if it was, or if it's supposed to be that way. I will include, if you have used, if an award has specific insignia, we have insignia directions written already, or it must be gold here, black here, etc. And I will include those, so you don't have to try and write that. You will turn in the black and white artwork. You will also make yourself a singular copy and paint, have somebody, you, if you're a painter, or somebody who you know who's a painter, paint a single copy of how it should be painted based on the design that you've come up with. So if you have somebody paint that as part of the group, so that we have an example ready to go to put up on the website in the galleries, which I will also be working on updating massively during this process, so that there's already at least one really nicely painted example in the galleries for people to start working on to see what it's supposed to look like. Again, a ductus, so an alphabet of every letter in capital and lowercase forms for the calligraphy hand being used, so that our calligraphers coming in behind you know how to make it look right, instead of trying to figure out how to put together a letter that may not be in the actual document. The size of, let us know somewhere on there, the size of the nib used for calligraphy, and probably brand, because that has a little bit of an impact. You know, if you're like, I used a Mitchell and it was this size, just because that information is useful to our calligraphers. You will also fill out, we have a charter and original work publication form. I have the link mentioned here. It is, of course, in the Scribal website in that same area that we've discussed. It's, if you go look at the how to paint a charter, there's literally kind of step-by-step guidelines that follow this information that is there. Please, you can also use the traditional Kingdom Artist release form, but this one is more designed specifically for our charter usage and has been around for a while. It's necessary that you mark the box on whatever thing release you turn in that says that control over the design goes to the College of Scribes. This is think of this as like the work for hire that professional artists do, you know, where it doesn't belong to them when they're done. It belongs to the company that they're working for. The reason for this is what it allows the college to do is, if the scroll text changes or the constitution for the award changes, sometimes awards sort of change meaning, or the badge changes. We had this happen recently where a badge changed. And for us to be able to legally, properly make those tiny minor updates to keep it relevant and in circulation, we need that ability. Also, the fact that we're making multiple copies and handing them out to people to paint them. So please mark that correctly. You will still always be credited on your scroll for your design, because it will go right there on the page and on the website. But that is very important. And then, so for submitting the final design, and this is all just very basic technical stuff here. The final version of your clean black and white original that you designed on the original, do not send me a photocopy of that. I will be making the master off of the actual original. The painted example copy and the ductus, those are going to have to be sent either by mail or by SCA courier. If you don't want to put it in the mail, that's totally fine. We can meet up at an event, or we can arrange for somebody that you trust or I trust to pick it up and bring it to me, because I will make the masters out of it. The scroll information, that all of that data that we had, can be sent on paper, or you can just send it in an email. I actually would prefer that the publication forms be sent in email. The permission forms, please email them, because as it is, we collect those digitally now instead of like in a box that gets carried around and no one ever has access to them. So I would really like to have those digitally so I can store them properly in the Star Signet account, so that all future signets have access to those and can check them and make sure that everything is filed properly. So be sure again to check the official award charter box and please, if it asks about website posting, please say, yes, it's okay to post it on the Ansteorra and Scribal website, because that's where the examples go. And so that's out there so people can say, oh, this is how you paint it. But that's the basics of the nuts and bolts of how this works. So this is not so much the design part of a class, but how this process works and what the requirements are to make sure that the design that you put together comes up and is usable at the end. Individual help and assistance and suggestions will happen one-on-one so that everybody gets a personal experience with that, talking to anybody in your local area, and then just checking in with me as the process goes briefly, just so we can make sure it's on track. Are there any other questions or comments about that at this time?
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first one is pretty easy. Do you want numbers included on the duck tie?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Numbers would be great, because writing in the dates, it's very helpful if people know what the numbers look like, because otherwise, whatever happens, you get modern numbers.
Right. Okay. And then the other question, and I think you kind of sort of answered it when you were talking about the release forms, but on the wording on all the scrolls. So what happens if we have a crown and consort who don't use the masculine feminine pairing of king and queen? So is that when updates to scrolls happen?
So what I would like to do with this is I'm going to say, don't put king and queen at the bottom, because the calligrapher filling it out can put them in, which also will allow for whatever period title the king or queen wish to use, even if it is a king and queen. If they have personas where they use their historical title, then they can put that on there instead of saying king and queen.
So all the texts, though, all say Rex et Regina, king and queen of Ansteorra at the beginning.
Right. And that's where we're still kind of working on that part. Because Hillary, if you have input on this, please.
Yeah, I can add some historical context,
Please.
because I was the sable scroll that happened when Rowan won queen in her own right. And we went through a number of charters, and just at that time, we didn't have digital software that would really do what we needed to do. So it was a lot of cut and paste. We cut the text off of a copy and flipped king and queen. So queen was first and then king was next. I still have those few. We didn't do a whole group of all the charters because there just wasn't time.
Right.
And we needed 3 months to get them painted and in circulation so that we'd have something once the coronation had happened and they had stepped up. We also had somebody with access to a color copier at Exxon, which at that time was very expensive to use. And so they painted a really, really nice AOA with the correct order of queen and king, and color copied onto our charter paper 50 scrolls, which was amazing because AOAs are the one thing that happens the most. I think Colfina has a good point though, because we've had a couple of queen and queen candidate choices for coronation or for crown tourney, as well as a couple of king and king choices for coronation. So it's highly possible at some future date we will have a same-sex couple running as a possibility, as well as another queen king option. So it's a good question, and unfortunately it would mean we would have to go back and make corrections to a lot of our masters that we already have in circulation.
But and that's exactly a good point. What I would like to do with that, and I will talk to Star and see where we want to proceed with that, is if it is possible to simply leave the name and name part blank and let the calligrapher fill in king and queen.
Right.
It doesn't take very long.
And
on the new designs,
yeah,
then if whenever it happens, because we are doing some new designs in almost every area, we don't have to pull the other ones out of circulation.
Right.
We will have other alternatives already available for those reigns. And if
For
they
the
become,
specialties.
if and as those may become more common, we can continue to look at what we want
Right.
to do with the old ones.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking, is that this is such a specialty thing that as long as we can eventually create a single award with the new setup that needs to be filled in, then we should be in good shape for at least those singular events when they come up,
Yeah.
situations.
And that shouldn't be a hard change, if only because we're not actually changing the scroll texts. We're just leaving a couple of words out of the calligraphy.
Plus nowadays we have better digital equipment. So somebody could cut and paste,
Right.
instead of doing it physically, they could do it on a scanned copy. And then we could get some people painting on them for 3 months
Much
before
more
the
quickly, yeah.
transition happens. So it's a good question. And while I'm talking, the date that I had suggested was November, but the longest month is actually September. Yeah, I thought about that. I was like, that doesn't sound right. So if you can put in September in your text, that would be enough space for any date, month that comes up.
All right, thank you. Yes. All right, are there any other questions at this time? Obviously you can send in questions anytime you have them, but if there's anything else we want to put on here right now.
I would like to point out that in the text document, one of the approved variations of King and Queen of Ansteorra is the Stellar Crown of Ansteorra.
Fantastic. All right, so somebody has actually thought ahead of us on this one a little bit. And that will probably be the right direction then that we want to go, because that is gender neutral and answers the problem and is nice and short. So that is probably what we'll do with that then, as a simple answer. Thank you, Master Isaac, and thank you, Mistress Hillary, for all of the good input on this. Are there any other questions at this time before we just move into the general part of the evening? All right, I will assume not then. Thank you very much.